So this is just going to be a quick demonstration of some LCR item and fluid logistics, specifically just ways to get lots and lots of recipes in the same LCR. Does not rely on SFM, no open computers, so it's pretty simple to use. It will essentially just take AE patterns, translate that into something the LCR can use, and from there you can just let AE handle all of your fluid crafting without actually using fluid AE at all. It's all item based. So, the way that it works, this is our input right here. You'll see a pattern for this looks something like input fluids in cells, empty cells for output fluids, and then any items that go in the input buses. Those will then get input into this chest buffer here. What that will do is enable this item filter, which will send a signal, turn this latch on, which powering this thing is essentially our way of saying the LCR is being used. You'll see this has blocking mode, so no items go in here. So as all of those items are still in there when this activates, it's in a sense an airlock for recipes. This right here is just a machine controller that controls two things. One is an item conveyor below, set to export conditional. What that does is that will actually pull the items out of the input. And then on top, there is a shutter module right here, right on the face with the interface. And the point of that is blocking item input when there's already cells in the LCR. The point just being you don't want to cross your recipes, so the shutter on top, which also is set to redstone control, is used to block items when there's no items in here, but there are items in the LCR. Now, the next step of this is what the items do once they get pulled out. So when this conveyor activates, items will go into a pipe, and they will first try to go into this filter, as below it is a restrictive pipe. This filter here filters for NBT enabled empty volumetric flasks. This is just to pull all of the flasks that are going to be used for the output, and then it will distribute them with the output hatches. After the remaining items, which would be input fluids and possible actual items, they will pass into this restrictive pipe. They'll have two options, one more restrictive pipe below, and a filter that is NBT disabled, just searching for flasks. So any fluids at this point will then get pulled into here, and anything that's remaining will only be items, and they will go right into this input bus. You'll see I have transvector interfaces around here. That's mostly just because I'm lazy with pulling the items out of the output hatches, but they're not really needed. If I really quickly break one of these, you'll see there's a conveyor here set to import, allow export. The point of the drawers that are on here and the conveyors, as opposed to just piping straight into the hatch, is let's say that you are making more than 16 liters in one recipe. Let's say a recipe makes 64 liters. Well, that's going to take 4 stacks of cells. So all of your outputs are going to come out of this output hatch, so you need all of those cells to also go into this output hatch. So the point of the drawers is if you use differing item cells, quantities, they will split differently in the drawers, but the point just being that, like, you can use the first drawer and the first item number for all of your first outputs, second drawer and the second, like, fluid number for all of your second outputs. So if you have things that are one based on a 144 value and another based on a 250 value, you might not want to use the same cell just because you would have some issues with fluid still in the LCR. So the fix for that is using these drawers and splitting your cell stacks in different volume sizes. Same idea here, except instead of splitting different quantities for the outputs, it just simply splits all of the inputs. So all of the similar items will go into the same drawer. Even though they can't get pulled in right away, it will ensure that they will end up in there. I will say, if you happen to actually, I'll leave that for now. Alright, so the last part to this, once this gets enabled, all the items get pulled, fluids end up in the fluid spot, items in the items, cells ready to catch outputs. The LCR will turn on, start running recipes, and this will kick in. These are just inverted fluid detectors and an item detector on the input hatches and bus. That will enable a signal here. You'll see it will then run into a NOT gate and then into a pulse former. So once it gets all the items, it does its thing. This will then get a signal because there will be items and fluids in here. It'll start running. Eventually it'll run out of everything. Everything will be empty. This will then turn off. NOT gate on, sends a pulse, resets this, which resets this value, which is what we use to then let another recipe in. Basically, all of this is just to avoid recipes crossing with each other. It's essentially extending the concept of AE blocking mode from one inventory to the entire multi-block. So quick little demonstration of it, let's say. I currently have it set to make carbon monoxide, and actually I'm going to do, I have these set up here. This one has a crafting card and wants to pull the two things that we can craft, then inputs the cells into these tanks, which are just used to store the fluids. Cells get put back into the AE, and this is basically just a way of consistently crafting stuff to a buffer size. So as you see, if I go over here, the LCR will see it get a recipe when that blinks. Oh, I guess we missed it, but it'll run. It'll keep running. Eventually it'll stop. That resets that, and we saw right away another recipe just went in, and there it goes. I will say, I believe with the current method that I use on this, it takes roughly 10 ticks or so between the end of a recipe and the start of a new recipe. I think actually switching this over the way I just did might lower it down to about 6 ticks or so, because I believe there's a 1 tick delay on the output of this to here, and then I think each one of these adds a tick, so maybe 5 ticks or so just between when that starts and then this signal hits here, and then maybe another 3 for all the items to move. So overall, definitely a low time, but on some of those recipes that you're overclocking 4, 3, 2 ticks, you will notice some of this, the LCR will actually turn off. You can see if I was running this at a slightly lower voltage, I can't really put an LV hatch on there, but it would be running continuously just because it would still be running that last recipe when it realizes it needs to put new items in, and they will be in before it finishes that last recipe. As the one thing I do think would be very improvable about this, is if there was a way to get it to just enough time to somehow do it in maybe 2 ticks, just to basically allow any recipe to run 24/7 in this. But at the moment, I'm not super focused on that. You'll see that this time it's just been auto-crafting things. I set the buffer, and it's just been going. I only have 2 recipes in here, but of course you can put 36 just in this alone. And at the cost of a little bit of speed, you can actually expand the chest buffers very easily. Just adding more of them on here and adding sequencing to which gets activated. But yeah, I hope this is somewhat informative. I know personally I'm probably going to use this in my next playthrough, just because I hate making lots and lots of LCRs. I did the first time, and then I was like, nope, never again. But anyway, yeah, this is a great way to combine similar circuit integration LCR recipes into the same LCR.